We've reached our scheduled start time, but as usual, we'll take some time to let people join. We'll get started when the join rate slows. Noting again that we'll get started in a moment after our join rate slows. Our join rate is still fairly high, and I know of a few people that we're expecting that have not joined yet. So we'll give it a few minutes more. It's interesting that the join rate is a little more spread out this month than some previous months. It's not quite the usual dog pile right in the first 2 minutes.
Hey, we're on vacation.
Yeah.
Is it a hint because I'm joining late?
No, it's not just you. Couple of more moments. The join rate is still very high, so we'll all right, we're far enough in. Welcome everyone and thank you. Remember that this is a recorded session. The recording will appear on YouTube at some point after the meeting ends. If you've got the equipment and are willing, please share your video. We'd like for this to be a around the table meeting experience. The agenda and notes are available at the link that was sent to the tools discussed list. And Roman, they should be navigable correctly from the data tracker meeting page this time. Still is a manual step for us since the tools notes have followed a schema that existed before the interim meeting schema came into existence.
Appreciate it.
All right. Join rate is getting very close to stable. Still expecting Jay. Haven't seen him join yet, but well, he should be here before the call as we're too deep into the call. Does anyone have any agenda bashes? The agenda is the outline of the notes. remember to use the expand all in that right-hand column of the notes page to see the outline easily. So we're going to spend a little more time on this call than we have in the past on the section that is normally labeled FYI and development projects. Expecting to go through most of this in a higher degree of detail and see if we get a bit more interaction and a little bit more insight into what we're actively working on. The big picture, again, and this hasn't changed much since last month, and I didn't call out in it that part of what happened in the last month was IETF 123, which consumed a great deal of our resources, but 123 went well. We are still focusing heavily on the purple, red, and draft forge work, with a great deal of that focus being on purple and red at the moment. We're racing RFC 10K. While we're doing this, we are doing the work to get artifacts into blob storage. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the call so that we can avoid things like the massive amount of managed challenges that we were issuing for meeting materials during IETF 123. We are set for the transition of the larger applications that haven't moved from DigitalOcean into Azure this coming Thursday. That'll be the data tracker, the mail archive, the primary www IETF server, and IMAP. We're still making progress on the IESG dashboards and IAB liaison management tooling projects, although that has not moved as quickly as the other bullets, mostly because of the meeting and this move of the major applications into Azure. I expect that to have a bigger bump between this meeting and September's.
So, Robert, as you are talking about Azure transition, you mentioned multiple parts of the IETF website moving to Azure. Will they be moving all at the same day, or is it one by one?
All at the same time. So it's this transition that's announced on the blog at www.ietf.org, the mail that I sent to IETF announce, and a little pop-up you get on the data tracker that tells you we're moving these things. So we'll talk more about that transition in just a moment. So
thank you.
And the last thing in this is that we're stabilizing the mail system, continuing. That's going to be a long ongoing process. There's a little bit of discussion about that later on in the call. And we're trying to put the last changes that we need to put into IDNets 3 to move into that and sunset IDNets 2. So under hot topics, the first question I really wanted to ask, people have seen the agenda for the call, they've seen the conversations that we've had on IETF Discuss. Is there any follow-up for things that were noticed at IETF 123 that we need to address before we get to IETF 124 that there isn't an obvious discussion taking place for already, isn't captured in the notes here, isn't in a GitHub issue? Did anybody see anything go by that we need to capture?
I mean, I didn't see what you captured already, but I assume you've seen the discussion on PDFs.
No, which one?
I think on the working group shares mailing list, there was like the question if we still need to convert everything to PDF or we can also use other formats to show things in Meet Echo.
Right. So That's probably going to need to be an IESG level discussion. The question that Mary is pointing to is whether or not Medico should integrate and play like native PowerPoint or other slide animation applications instead of only playing PDF. A separate question from, do you do this during the meeting where the video is being captured from the what do we place into the archives as artifacts, what would go into the proceedings. We've had some tension in the past, discussions around whether or not we should be archiving anything but PDF for these things. And I would personally argue that we should move back to archiving only PDF and not trying to archive other formats of slides, just for minimizing security risk issues, for if nothing else. We have not raised the question with Medico about whether or not they could handle integrations with animated players or not. So.
Yeah, I think the question in the discussion was rather the other way around, because sometimes the auto conversion from another format into PDF doesn't do exactly what's expected. So the question was rather, do we really need that? We need to have everything in PDF. And the answer is yes, we need it for now for Meet Echo, but if we don't have that constraint, that's a broader question to answer, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's more than we need it for Meet Echo. I think that's we need it for the archives. Anyone have anything else? Right, Nick, would you like to walk us through what we're going to be doing on Thursday?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So we're going to migrate the Tracker mail archive and the IETF website to Azure on Thursday, starting at 19 UTC. We're reserving a 2-hour window, but our tests have shown that it takes like a quarter of that time. So we'll see. During that time, Data Tracker mail archive will be unavailable, and anything that relies on the authentication. So if you need to log into the wiki or to Meet Echo, that will not work during that time. There shouldn't be any downtime for the IETF website and the rsync. However, any content that you access will be frozen in time to the start of the migration. And yeah, the goal is to improve performance and manageability for these services. And yeah, any updates will be posted on our status page, so you can follow progress there.
So we're making a couple of architectural changes. If you look at the link at the top of the notes page to the Miro board that shows the deployment map for all of our services, you'll note that we're moving the primary applications from using managed databases to a self-hosted Postgres cluster solution. So Mike Richardson aimed us at this several meetings ago. Our tests showed that it was actually of great benefit to us to do so, but this is going to be part of the value add for making this transition. We're just making it at the same time as the transition between these clouds so that we only have one outage. So. Anybody have any questions about this transition?
I will put myself a reminder to cross my fingers.
Yeah, thank you. So our current security review contractor is in progress on the first two tasks that we brought them on to do. The first was reevaluation of the data tracker. The second is an evaluation of our current cloud infrastructure. So the focus so far, at least what they've been reporting to us so far, has been on the data tracker. They found some very interesting things. Most of them are actually in XML to RFC, and the way data tracker uses XML to RFC. We have a couple of issues that we'll be talking about a little bit later that we're going to add behavior to XML to RFC to avoid, mostly around the way XML to RFC can include things, not just through XI include, but the basic mechanic that we need to address is XML to RFC reaching out and touching other things. So we'll have a little bit more discussion later in the call about this, but the details will come around when we've got the fixes in place to those that actually present some level of vulnerability to us. There's nothing super scary, but there's stuff that we do want to address. IETF 3 is ready for testing, ready for more testing. Not much changed between the last call and this call, mostly because of the meeting. There are still a few errors that it generates that are not useful, that are captured on the issues link that we will address before we roll it into being the production barrier at submission. But we're expecting that to happen soon, preferably. I'm hoping that we'll have this done by the time we get to September's tools call. If anyone here hasn't started experimenting with IETF 3, please take some time to do so. Just go grab other people's drafts from the /doc/recent endpoint at the data tracker and feed them through and see if you spot places that it needs improvement. Has Jay joined the call? I'm going to skip this use of paid libraries and IETF tools section for a moment. I think Jay would like to be here for that discussion, and I know he planned to join, so we'll give him some time to join, and we'll come back to that one. Is Dane on the call? I don't see Dane either. So new machine futures, that's the NMF in the acronym in the mail flow diagrams section of the notes, have started building sequence diagrams to pull apart what the behavior of the mail system currently is. There's a link to some of what they've been working on. Anyone that has the time and the interest can start digging through those and commenting on what they see that they think isn't what the system's actually doing or isn't what the system actually should be doing. They're using these to start to build a plan for pulling the hairball of a implementation that we currently have into more manageable and purposely deployed components. So I noted before that we did spend some time at 123 working with Cloudflare to reduce the number of managed challenges that real meeting participants were facing when they were trying to get things like agendas and slides for sessions. We curtailed that some, but not enough in my opinion. The ultimate solution for this is going to be when we have these artifacts in blob storage and they are served from blob store at the edge instead of from the origin, then the managed challenge for those particular assets becomes completely unnecessary. But in the meantime, we're continuing to try to find ways to not challenge our real users. One of the limitations that we hit, Cloudflare is looking into whether or not it's possible to do something about this, is that the way that the WAF, the security rules for managed challenge fires, and the cache interact, there's no way to say, oh no, this document is already in cache at an edge, don't bother challenging it. So people were having to deal with managed challenges for things that they had already fetched just a few moments ago. And that's something that we want to make go away as soon as we can. Jennifer, can you start talking about the next few things?
Sure. So I guess the first one is the data tracker password reset, which caused a bunch of noise a month or so before 123. Fortunately, most of the noise quieted down before the meeting actually started. We did wind up having half a dozen or so people, I think, through some combination of the desk and trouble tickets, who had trouble doing the password reset dance. Most of those came down to a mail server that was not accepting mail with the reset links, which is not something that we have a lot of. There's not a lot we can do about that. I think we worked with them, and then a few people who had accounts that were had been misconfigured from long ago that we straightened out. So I think overall that went fairly smoothly and has us in a good spot for moving off of data tracker centric authentication to an external authentication provider, which we plan to do hopefully later this year, I guess, but not in the immediate future. Any questions or comments about that? Okay. Then I guess the next item on here is this personless user phenomenon that we have, which I guess overlaps a little with the general database cleanup that we're trying to do. We've talked about this at previous meetings. I don't recall exactly when, but the data tracker user records are intended to be linked to person records, which represent, a person in the real world, known either because they logged in or because they were learned about as an author of a draft or various other reasons. But for various historical reasons, there are around a little bit north of 6,000 user accounts that don't have a person attached to them. Some of these are very old, but they do trickle in slowly for reasons that we don't entirely understand. But there are accounts that are currently unusable. You can't actually log in and do anything in this state. So we are, having looked at these over the last couple of years and noticing they're there and meaning to do something about it. We've got the tooling in place to actually remove all of these accounts. And that will do two things. One, it will let us get rid of a bunch of cruft that's just piled up. And the other is make it easier for us to audit where these are coming from. So we're planning to do that. I don't think we have a firm date on that, but in the next couple of weeks, I think for sure. And I expect nobody will notice at all. So if anyone has any questions, I think that's all I have to say about it.
6,000 out of how many?
I think
If you have an idea.
something like 40,000 is the number that's coming to mind. I don't know if that's accurate.
Okay.
But, a
I
small
mean, whatever. Yeah.
Actually, I think it may be even, it's a small fraction.
I don't need a number, right? So it's 6 out of 40. It's
Yeah, I think
it's this important part, but if they're useless, let's
Yeah.
remove them. Yeah.
I'm sure it's not any bigger a fraction than that. That's not.
Was your off the top of your head guess, Jennifer?
I had guessed 40, but
It is 39,664 as of this morning.
okay.
You were wrong, Jennifer.
Really
you were
good.
wrong, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to put it in perspective, I was looking at how many there were recently, and there were, I think, 3 created in the last year. I guess one place we know they come from is when 2-person records are merged. The user account that was abandoned is left around in an inactive state. So that's I think the majority, many of the recent-ish ones, but.
Yep. All right. Just as a note, the Medico team has done prototype work of using Cloudflare Stream with the Medico player, and they don't see any barriers. We're talking to them about what it would take to add upload to Cloudflare Stream to the their normal workflow for once a session recording is available. And then we will talk more about making using Cloudflare Stream an option in the player and putting links into the data tracker. A bulk load doesn't look like it's going to be problematic. We're still working with Greg to make sure that we've got all of the assets that we would need to transfer. So this is moving along at a slow pace. From the last call, we noted there was discussion that needed to happen around making the full set of recordings available for other experiments with other platforms, other possible deployments, but there's some discussions about how we make sure that there's an appropriate application of there's a word I'm looking for that's not copyright, but I'm going to say copyright, and you can fill in whatever the right word was. I apologize. Those conversations haven't happened yet, so that's where we are with that. Licensing was the word I was looking for. So, Kassar, do you want to say anything about what's happening with Zulip?
Nothing much to say. It's just a maintenance update to 10.4. No major changes from the previous version.
All right, Jennifer, I'd like to hand it back to you to talk more in depth about what we're doing with the data tracker, and feel free to hand things back to any of the rest of us if there's a particular thing you'd like for us to highlight.
Okay. So I guess the big thing that I have been beating my head against somewhat during 123 and before that is getting ready to move data tracker off of Python 3.9 and to a modern supported version. Python 3.9 goes end of life or end of support in October, so we have a couple months on that. And we now have that. So there were a number of, a relatively small number of changes compared to the last bump that we made. Python underwent a big, a fairly large set of incompatible changes when it passed 3.7. So it wasn't as bad as that upgrade, but there were a few libraries that needed to be reworked. One that we dealt with a couple months ago was the way that we test email during development. There's a SMTP stand-in server that used a library that had been retired after, I don't remember if it was 3.9 or 3.10, but that needed a rewrite. There was also the way we measure code coverage. We have a package that we've been using for many years that had been way out of support. I think the version that we were using was current as of 2018, I think. And we had been limping along with it because they had undergone a fairly significant API change. So those pieces have been straightened out. And the last piece was reviewing our dependencies to see if we have things that are going to break when we move to 3.12. Well, we're moving to 3.12, and I'll say why not 3.13 in a sec. But we did go through the dependencies, and almost all of them are declared as being compatible with 3.12. There are a few that are in the sort of anything greater than 3.4 kind of category that are very likely to continue working. And we know that all of our tests are passing. So, but there's some room for there to be hidden breakage. To try to exercise that, we've stood up a sandbox instance of this at, I'll post it in a moment, but dt-py312.dev.ietf.org. That is running the feature branch that has the upgrade on it. And is, I haven't found anything broken there, but if anybody wants to poke at things, they should feel free. I think the next upgrade after this is going to have to be Django pretty quickly, because we're on 4.2, which goes out of support next April. So that's on our radar. And it's actually the Python or the Django upgrade is the reason we're targeting 3.12 instead of 3.13. So we're going to have to do a little bit of a back and forth leapfrogging to get everything to current versions. So toward the probably early next year, we'll be doing the migration to Django 5.2, I expect. That will let us go to probably Python 3. At least 13 and maybe 14 at that point, and then we'll have some breathing room for a year or two. I would say when it comes to that, we know there will be quite a bit of work on the Django upgrade. That's not going to be trivial. There's a number of deprecations that we're going to have to audit and sift through. One big one will be time zone management, because Python has been moving from one called PyTZ to a new system called ZoneInfo that we know we have some interactions with that will need refactoring. But so I think that's what I've got on, on there.
So 2 things that I'd like to call attention to are the not really reflected here because we didn't change much other than making sure that the back end was following along as we're making the migration, and that is the blob store work. Just to reiterate, where we are moving to, instead of keeping things like drafts and RFCs and meeting slides and other proceedings-oriented artifacts, all of the things that we have to date kept in a large collection on disk, we will be keeping as blob objects. The authoritative store for them will depend on the application. For most of the things that you manipulate with the data tracker will be the authoritative application, and it will have one of these blob DBs. The primary one will be actually in Postgres, a separate database from the data tracker's main database, that has gearing that will also place those blobs in R2 so that they're available to the edges at Cloudflare for rapid access for people to get to. The challenges in setting these things up have involved making sure that we are preserving some of the provenance information, particularly things like the file system's last modification time for the file. So that's in the infrastructure part of that is fairly solid at this point, and over the next couple of cycles, we're going to be working on the code that will load all of the existing artifacts into these blob stores. The other thing I wanted to call attention to was the work that mostly Rudy, help from a few other people, but mostly Rudy did on the meeting agenda iCalendar files. And I thought it would be worth Rudy, you just mentioning a couple of the challenges that you ran into with that and why we were doing it.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, previously we were rendering the calendar files for our meeting agenda in our own template file that we had to maintain ourselves. And yeah, that was pretty hard to maintain. It was difficult to test. And it was also rather slow. So we decided to use a library to generate our iCal files. And yeah, so I refactored the code to use the iCalendar library of Python. And yeah, like this, we can essentially guarantee that the format is respecting RFC 5545, so that it corresponds to the RFC, and also it loads a bit faster, and it's just overall easier to maintain and easier to test.
All right. A bit of a deeper dive than usual in Data Tracker. Anybody have any questions? Kasara, you've got the next several sections. Please go ahead and call out in particular places where, heavy lifting was required.
So as Robert mentioned earlier, the DoinSec has found some vulnerabilities in some of our systems, and it's easier to restrict some of those from XML to RFC. So I'm working on a couple of those, adding bit of more restriction about the input that how XML to RFC process some input and give some access control over to services to do restrict things. I don't want to go into further details into those stuff, but I'll be making a release when those when those bugs are fixed and controls are added. On the upcoming changes for XML to RFC, there's one change that is a bug fix. That's XML to RFC has this no external JS flag, but so far it has no effect. Like even if that flag is set, the min.js has been added. So with the next release, the behavior will be as expected if that flag is used. Any question on XML to RFC?
I've got one thing I'd like to add. As you note here, we made a grammar change in the release that we issued right before IETF 123. And formally, that was jumping the gun, as we don't really quite have all of the I's dotted and T's crossed on the process that we're agreeing to follow on making grammar changes. So we were a little ahead of the game. Jay's, I think, preparing a message for RSWG to explain what happened and what we're going to be doing going forward as we are going to move more of these grammar changes in. But I just wanted to call out that we did recognize that we slightly overstepped the envelope when we did that. So.
I can move into a BibXML service. So I'm working on a prototype that make use of rebose gems to get the BibXML data and then serve them from a blob store in Cloudflare. So right now we are using outdated gems for the BibXML service, and that's been hard to migrate to our hard to upgrade and get the BibXML data that we want from these gems. It's a big uplift to change all the gems to the latest version, because all those are the way it's implemented. Everything is connected, so this will require all the data sources to be updated, and it's a big task to maintain. So the prototype I'm working on would give us flexibility to upgrade few of the data sources when required, and still make use of the gems that Rebos publish. This also improves the search, because we can make use of something like a type sense search that other services are going to use in the future. On www, the next there's upcoming release with the Wagtail 7.0 LTS and Django 5.2. On the SVG, there will be a upcoming release with few bug fixes and improvements to PyPy publishing workflow. I'll bring RFC to HTML as well. So we received a PR from a community member to improve RFC to HTML, use it as a command line tool, and that will be included in a upcoming release. And for maintenance purposes, we will be dropping Python 3.8 support and make improvements so that RFC to HTML will use PyPy secured publishing workflow. That's all I got.
I'll call out again, it crosses several of these things, including XML, RFC, and IDNets. The IPMC /trust has a schedule that they're working towards now for finishing the release of the TLP6. The text is available in draft form at this point. We have previously gone through the exercise of finding the places in XML, RFC, and IDNets that we need to touch, both IDNets 2 and IDNets 3, to accept the new TLP that's coming and the new name for the trust. And we're expecting that we will enable this towards the end of the year and start requiring submissions to conform to the new IPR declaration. You know, in the XML where you're currently using Trust 2009, there will be another value to be determined what the exact value of that string is that will be phased in. So, Ryan, could you talk briefly what's happening with Mail Archive?
Yes, so since the last call, we've had 2 releases, really just in order to get ready for the migration to the Azure cluster, specifically to support Azure blob storage, Elasticsearch snapshots, again, in preparation for that migration. Then upcoming work, we have kind of mirroring the data tracker. We're going to be upgrading from Python 3.9 to 3.12. Also implementing blob storage support to kind of replace our NFS backend. And then also looking at improvements to the search results page, which has a kind of a hand-rolled infinite scroll feature that if you scroll through there a lot, it's coming up against rate limits that we have set up in the Cloudflare. So probably looking at a React style responsive component that will work more efficiently for displaying the search results. And that's it for the Mail Archive.
All right. We've got 3 big things to hit still. Purple and red, and then the topic that we skipped. I don't think Jay has been able to join. Let's spend 5 minutes on purple and red and 5 minutes on the topic on using licensed components for deployed systems. So for purple and red, I guess, Jennifer, would it be reasonable for you to start in on what we've been doing?
Yeah, I can say something. I don't know if Rudy wants to also. He's been doing a lot of it for purple.
Yeah, sure. I can also go through the new features. So essentially our goal was to reach a point with purple so that the RPC can actively use it and give us more feedback so that we go into an like iteration where we get feedback, fix it, and add features as required. So the latest features that we added in the last months were to be able to handle document dependencies. So when you enqueue documents, you can set the normative references, you can add, remove them, and it's all been stored in the database. Another feature I was working on was to import assignments from the old system. So essentially which RPC employees are working on which role on which document. So importing that data and storing it in an optimized format for Purple. And also a new feature to be able to reorder authors for a draft. So that were a few new features we've been working on, and I'm currently working on a mapping of labels. So to import labels from the old system, and we are mapping them to kind of new, more self-explanatory label names for the new system.
So the another thing that's been going on that is an ongoing task is the as we're importing the existing RFC editor database into the models that Purple is using, we are reconciling the idea of authors between the RFC editor database and the data tracker, making appropriate connections to data tracker persons when we have them and creating data tracker persons when we don't. This is a large and mostly manual bit of data reconciliation. We've got a several thousand line utility file that is making the associations that we've hand checked when inference code can't make the association that this John Smith is that John Smith, right? We also have a fairly large architectural problem to solve in coordinating ongoing changes between the RFC editor database and the data tracker and other applications, because we're approaching this with a mindset of building a reusable set of technologies. And that is, how do we deal with things like when a data tracker, two data tracker persons get merged into one, i.e. the records that the data tracker change, and those two different data tracker persons had RFCs, and this happens in the current database that one real person has two data tracker records, and each of those have RFCs hanging off of them. When they're merged at the data tracker, how does the RFC editor database get told and follow along on that merge? And likewise, when some update happens to RFC metadata at the RFC editor's database, how does that information get into the data tracker? And how do we solve this in such a way that this information gets transferred reliably when one or other of those services is down at the instance that these actions take place? So, or communication between them is unavailable because, you know, the internet is having a moment. So these are the kinds of things that we're pushing through at the moment. I said 5 minutes for this. I'm going to take a couple of minutes more in case Matthew or anybody else has something they want to highlight on what we're doing with both red and purple. Matthew, in particular, is there something that you'd like to call out?
I mean, I suppose, yeah, mostly this past month InRed has been working on the info pages. So per the designs that have already been shared, those info pages will have RFC content, and there's been a lot of work around making sure that those are responsive, so that they'll work on unusual tablet sizes and unusual mobile phone sizes. Locally, I've got it working down to about 180 pixels wide, so very, very narrow displays, and yet still being fairly usable. Although, of course, a wider display would be nice to read. And yeah, that's. Oh, the other one, I suppose, is with plain text RFCs. On these info pages, we're going to have an algorithmic font size. So this means that based on the max width of plain text RFCs, so the line width, usually around about 80 characters or so, we pre-compute the max width and then choose a font size that's appropriate for that, so that you can display those amount of characters on screen. Yeah, that's quite unusual for sites to do that kind of thing, rather than specifying a lot of responsive breakpoints and font sizes. So an algorithmic font size is unique to, I suppose, large sections of pre-formatted text. So when you've got some kind of monospace font, but yeah, we can do that now. So I think it's looking quite nice. That's it.
All right. Let me roll back and pinch it for Jay on this use of paid libraries and IETF tools. Hopefully you've had a chance to read through the text that's provided there. The nutshell of the question is that we've had a strong preference for only using open source components to date, even on the production side. We've got a question about some tooling that we could use that would require licensing of a feature set, if not open source, into possibly closed source, for both the development side of things, where a developer would need some licenses for some things to do, or for actual runtime, where the deployment would need a license to do some certain subset of things. And what we wanted to talk about, and we don't really have time to go into a lot of it, we can take some opinions. We're definitely going to bring this one back and talk about it on IETF Tools Discuss as well, is where it's reasonable for us to use these for cost, possibly closed source things in particularly the production environments. So Rich, Eric, I saw you weigh in before you left about the your opinions. He pointed out that the parts of the backend, like for the RFC editor website, he doesn't mind, but for the data tracker, he would want developers to still have the ability to do everything that the data tracker would do in production. Anybody else have any off-the-cuff opinions? Yeah, sorry for squeezing us up against the end of the time. One last thing before we run out of time. How have people felt about this slightly deeper dive into the details of the things that we're fighting against? Has that provided useful insight for you?
Yeah, I think it has. Like, it lets us set our expectations.
Okay.
It's always good to hear about the people's problems. No, seriously, it's good.
Also, you never know. It's like certainly been one time when somebody was tearing his hair out, and I said, "Oh yeah, that problem."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone again for taking the time to spend on these calls and for all of the feedback that you provide. And we will talk to you on the next one of these and see you online in the meantime. Bye-bye.